Exodus is one of the most crucial books in all of Scripture. And if you want to know more about this book, you've come to the right place. DMBC Youth Bible Catch-Up. Let's do this. The word Exodus comes from a Greek word which means going out or departure. This is a book written by Moses, and it's all about God, through Moses, fulfilling the promises he gave to Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, you can read about it. God made Abraham 3 promises. He promises Abraham a great nation, a great land, and a great blessing, and that through Abraham, all the nations of the world would be blessed. And you see God take steps to fulfill these promises in this book. The first section of the book is Israel and Egypt. This is chapters 1 through 18. This book starts off with God's people being oppressed by an evil leader. But God hears their cries and in response calls Moses. Moses does this whole let my people go thing, which leads to 10 plagues, which eventually leads to the Passover, which delivers God's people out of slavery through the parting of the Red Sea into the wilderness, which brings us to our next section, Israel in the wilderness, chapters 12 through 18. Eventually, they get to Sinai, where Moses meets with God, and they strike up this covenant together, this relationship together, which is dependent upon God's law given to God's people through the mediator of Moses. This is in chapter 20 where the 10 Commandments come into play. There's a lengthy section about the rules of the tabernacle. The tabernacle was where God was going to dwell with his people, this tent of meeting, which comes to a grand finale in chapter 40 where God's glory fills the tabernacle in a spectacular way. The Bible is all about Jesus. Exodus is all about Jesus. And the New Testament loves to use the Exodus imagery as a metaphor for what Jesus did for us in his life, death, and resurrection in his entire ministry. But Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is not just a metaphor for the Exodus, but it's a fulfillment of the Exodus. We were enslaved to sin, and we were given our freedom. We were redeemed by the blood of the Passover lamb. We see Jesus even explicitly identified as our Passover lamb in 1 Corinthians 5, chapter 7. Why did God do this? Why did God do all these signs and wonders to redeem us from slavery? So that God could dwell with his people. We see in John 1:14 where it says the word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt is literally tabernacled. So Jesus is not just the fulfillment of the Passover. Jesus is not just the fulfillment of the law, but Jesus is the fulfillment of the tabernacle, God dwelling with man, our Emmanuel. And the reason why Jesus came down here is so that we could dwell with God forever. And that's how the whole story ends in Revelation 21, verse 3, where it says, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God." This is the goal of Exodus. This is the goal of Jesus, and really it's the goal of the entire Bible. God defeating his enemies so that he can dwell with his beloved people. What great news. If you want to understand the gospel, you've got to understand the Exodus, so take up and read.